This is the story of a carefully crafted life ripped apart.
No matter how hard I try, I don't think I could ever get back to where I was.
A successful British bank manager, wrongly accused of the most serious crimes: drugs, guns, terrorism. The story of a couple left paralysed by fear throughout a 2-year Metropolitan Police investigation.
It felt like we was in this loop of nothingness and nothing was coming from them, and we was just sitting ducks waiting for them to actually take him to prison.
An investigation eventually dropped with no explanation. An investigation the couple say would never have been started if Dale wasn't black. This is how it began. Dale Semper says he was often stopped by police as he drove on his way to work at the bank, but this time, driving with his partner Denise, it was very different. Dale was arrested here on his way to work in August 2017. Officers surrounded the car, shouting at him to get out. They told him he was being arrested on suspicion of the possession of a weapon. Handcuffed at the side of the road, police said because he had become agitated, he was then taken home so they could search his house. At the same time, they were searching his mother's flat and Denise's. No firearms were found anywhere, and the family assumed this was a terrible mistake by the Met, but that it would now be over. Though no gun was found, officers did find just under £2,000 in Dale's safe. De-arrested for firearms, he was immediately arrested again on suspicion of money laundering. As he told us when we first spoke to him 3 years ago, the warrant application had been based on a string of wild allegations.
He said I was involved in a sham marriage, money laundering. I'm thinking, what? I go by 4 different aliases, different names. I'm thinking, okay, what? I'm into drugs, and drugs, human trafficking, and the worst one was terrorism.
Dale's assets were frozen, and the 6-time Bank Manager of the Year was suspended from work. He was later arrested a second time, again on suspicion of possessing firearms. Again, none were found. He was never charged with any crime. In October 2019, it all ends with a call from the Met. No further action, no explanation, no apology either. We went back to see Dale and Denise. They filed a formal complaint straight after the initial arrest. 5.5 years later, the Metropolitan Police have finally responded. Not one aspect of the complaint has been upheld.
5.5 years of waiting around, basically suffering through PTSD, having the kind of stress, going to work, putting a smile on your face when inside you're dying inside. And for you to come back to me and say to me that no part of my complaint was upheld, how is that possible?
There is no money laundering, there is no fraud, there is no drugs, there is no links to anything. We're just normal people going to work every day, coming home. There is nothing here. So what else is there other than our blackness?
That issue of their blackness, as Denise put it, was critical to their complaint against the Met. Dale was born in Montserrat and is British, but mistakes and questions about his nationality pepper the investigation from the start. The Metropolitan Police insist Dale's ethnicity was never a relevant factor, though it is referenced on a number of occasions throughout the investigation. The initial arrest warrant application says Dale is a Jamaican living illegally here in the UK. Bodycam footage of the police search of his house, referenced in the complaint, shows one officer asking Dale, "Where are you from originally?" Another officer suggesting he could be African. The Met Police says none of these specific comments are racist. The bodycam footage transcribed in the complaint response records one officer while searching the house saying, "He's got 72k in his account. He's supposed to have 14 houses." To which the other replies, "That's not bad for a young lad from Montserrat, is it?" The Met response is, "I understand how this comment could have been perceived as discriminatory and would like to sincerely apologise to your client." So they're apologising. Why isn't that enough?
Would you say the same thing if I was white? Would you have said that if I was a white bank manager? Would you make a comment like that?
It cannot be taken any other way than a racist comment. And for them to be putting it back on us for, us perceiving that as racist, we cannot perceive it any other way than a racist comment.
In their response, the Met say if the officer was still employed, it's likely he would have received learning and a conversation to be mindful of his language. But in the 5.5 years it took the Met to investigate, the officer left the force, unrelated to this incident, before they could speak to him about his language. In a separate exchange, an officer is captured on body cam saying, "He's got 14 properties, he lives in luxury, everything is immaculate. Where's he getting all that? What is he, a bank manager? Surely he's up to something." A fellow officer reminds him the body-worn camera is still recording. "Oh yeah, thanks for that." Now the Met say this is not racist, it's to do with the fact you're a bank manager.
We go to work, we make sure we properly think about our investment, we're thinking about our future. So why shouldn't we own 14 properties? Other than the fact that we're black and we shouldn't own 14 properties. We don't own 14 properties, to be fair, so that was incorrect in the first place. That is how we feel. There is a box for us and we have, tried to get out of that box, and now somebody, the Met, is saying we should get back in that box.
It is not unusual for a racism complaint against the Met not to be upheld. Freedom of Information figures revealed that between 2015 and 2020, there were 1,368 complaints of racism, and just 22 were upheld. Dale's lawyer says the Met's handling of his complaint is as flawed as the investigation itself. It took almost 4 years for them to hand over Dale's case file, and despite dozens of officers being involved and allegations as serious as terrorism, not one officer has provided any notes.
Usually the course of practice would be to have at least, pocket notebook entries, but we've been told that none of the officers took any notes.
What do you make of that?
I find that really hard to believe.
The response to Dale's complaint came back just weeks after a damning review by Dame Louise Casey into the Met found it to be institutionally racist. Do you believe your case is an illustration of institutional racism?
Absolutely.
Absolutely. There's no other way to explain our case other than because we were black. We have now surpassed something that they feel that there's a barrier for us, and we've surpassed that, and now they're now trying to take us down because of it.
The couple's case has spanned 2 different Met commissioners. The arrival of Sir Mark Rowley had, they said, given them hope. They wrote to him twice during his first 6 months asking to speak to him. They got no reply. Do you have confidence in him?
None whatsoever. Absolutely none.
I feel the commissioner was just campaigning, right, to get what he wants. Everything that he said is just all lies. If he's any kind of a commissioner, I would want to sit down with the person, something like this has happened, something this serious. I want to have a sit down, have a talk with me and discuss with me why this has happened.
The couple are determined not to give up, pursuing a civil case and asking the police watchdog, the IOPC, to re-examine their complaint.
We wanted to start a family, and even now, up to this day, we still haven't even thought about it.
We've had to put our life on hold. We don't believe we should let go of this, even though it's still hurtful. And every time a bit of something comes back from the Met, it's a dagger.
They've already spent hundreds of thousands of pounds in legal fees, but the financial price is nothing to the cost this has exacted on their lives. Well, in response, the Metropolitan Police told us the Commissioner has been clear that racism will not be tolerated. They say they delayed dealing with the complaint until after the investigation into Dale ended in 2019, and that no finding of misconduct was made against any of the officers involved. Because of the complaints and ongoing legal action, they told us it would be inappropriate to comment in detail. Meanwhile, the Metropolitan Police has referred itself to the Independent Office for Police Conduct after a woman was arrested and wrongly accused of fare evasion in Croydon on Friday.
What the hell?
Well, in footage circulating on social media, the woman can be seen being handcuffed and separated from her young son. In an initial response, the Metropolitan Police said the woman had refused to comply with the request to show her ticket, although it later became clear she had one. The police say they will revisit how they work with TfL inspectors. Well, joining me now is Dame Louise Casey, author of last year's landmark review into the culture and standards of the Metropolitan Police that found institutional racism, sexism and homophobia. Thank you very much for joining us. First to the story of Dale Semper, a 26-month criminal investigation, no further action. More than double that time, 5.5 years before the Met responded to his complaint. What do you make of it?
Well, while I cannot comment on the case because the couple, quite rightly, are continuing their battle for better treatment and justice, I do think that it's an example of what is very, very clear from the review that we undertook, which was a 14-month deep look into the Metropolitan Police. And what I think it showed and what is illustrated is that the sad fact is it's a combination of incompetence and essentially institutional racism. That's what we found. We found that, you know, they didn't get things right. So misconduct complaints from the public just take forever. So the average misconduct complaint takes at least 100 days. That's just the average.
This is 5.5 years.
This is 5.5 years. I think the majority of complaints made by the public, it's something like 90+%, are found with no further action at all. So complaints from the public are essentially never upheld and never listened to. The police feel that often they reference complaints from the public, I quote, to be malicious. Now, that may be true of some people, but that cannot be true of every single complaint that's made. So I think there's an issue of incompetence that I found in the Metropolitan Police. But running alongside that, I think, is this very clear sense for me that an organisation has to understand what it is. And I found the Metropolitan Police in new data, new information, post-Macpherson, to be, whether you call it institutional, whether you call it organisational, whether you call it systemic, whichever word you want to use, running deep into the organisation is the issue of race and racism, alongside misogyny, as well as other discrimination issues. And they have to accept that in the full face of what that is as an organisation.
It's interesting in this case, and I take your point about not wishing to comment on all of the specifics, but the Met do offer the word apologise a number of times about the racism, or what they call the perceived racism. I can understand how this comment might be perceived as discriminatory. Elsewhere, we apologise if Dale felt these comments were discriminatory. I mean, does that resonate with what you found?
Totally. And I think it's a classic case of denial, which is to put the responsibility on you for failing. So actually, I wasn't racist, but you perceive me to have been racist. I haven't been, you know, a sexist, misogynist, outrageous person. No, when I touched your backside, actually, that was just a friendly gesture. I'm sorry if you're upset by that. I mean, that's a classic way of organisations and individuals to deny what's going on.
I mean, that clearly you think has to change, because it is often the way the Met defend themselves that actually causes more anger. And in the video of the mother we saw being handcuffed today, the Met's initial statement said they could see why it looked concerning, but the video was a snapshot of the wider incident, which left many people accusing them of implying there's more to see here.
So one of the things that we found about the Metropolitan Police is that its culture is there's nothing to see here. You don't really understand. If you saw everything, you would be with us. A sense really that you just don't know enough about what we did, and therefore you would be on our side. And so, of course, then they never release that data. They never give you. I'm sure that they didn't turn around to the media.
They wouldn't allow us to
see body-worn videos and so on and so forth. And they do that all the time. And what we need for the Metropolitan Police to do is to move on from that defensiveness and say, well, actually, here's all of it. You know, if you've got body-worn video that is telling the public a different story, release it. Don't hide behind it.
I mean, finally, the Commissioner has been very clear that he is going to oversee radical change. There's a question, I suppose, are you confident that he's able to do that? But it is about trust. And here we have a bank manager, his mother who is an NHS worker, his partner who's a human resources worker, professional, saying we wouldn't call the Met now if we were in trouble. That is a sense of the challenge he faces, isn't it?
So the huge challenge, I think, facing British policing and the Metropolitan Police in London is that black people and people who aren't white for a long time have had no trust in the police. It's going down and down and down, and their inability to grip it, admit it and do something about it means it will continue to go down. But the thing I wanted to say, which I often think people will be watching programmes like this and reading reports like mine, what white people need to understand is that in families where their children are not white, they have to talk to them about how to deal with the police. It's called the talk and the conversation. Every child that goes into a shop is told to keep a receipt because they know, because they are black, they are more likely to be targeted for stop and search. And so my report showed evidentially, through every which way you look at it, if you are black, you are more likely to be stopped, searched, handcuffed, tasered and the use of force against you. Until we all wake up and realise what it's like for black people, particularly the people in charge of this country and in charge of the Met, we won't see the change we need.
Baroness Casey, thank you so much for coming in this evening.